Good evening, everyone. I'm Nafisa Eltahir, class of 2026 at Georgetown University in Qatar, majoring in international politics with double minor in economics and Arabic. Before we begin, and in the spirit of fostering thoughtful dialogue, I would like to share a few important reminders in line with Georgetown University's long-standing speech and expression policy. Firstly, questions will be welcomed with the designated time. To submit a question, please scan the QR code found on the notebooks and sign holders. Please use the provided format to submit your questions. Secondly, participants are free to use the information shared in these discussions. But out of respect for our speakers and to encourage open and honest dialogue, no attributable comments should be disclosed. This panel, Reimagining Sudan, explores how Sudan's civil society has responded to shifting political developments with new ideas of governance and state building. Experts will discuss the tensions between these visions in the political establishment and what they truly mean to Sudan's future. Our moderator for this panel is Muez Ali, Research and Policy Lead at EarthNet Center for Sustainable Future at Qatar Foundation, an Honor Research Fellow at UCL. His work focuses on food security, climate, and governance with special focus on Sudan. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Muez Ali. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is the final panel, so no pressure. I mean, we really hope to do this conference justice. We hope to finish on a high, but this is a very, we're going to be discussing a very heavy topic. We hope to explore how recent political developments in Sudan over the past decade or so brought new ideas and fresh perspectives into the political arena. We specifically discussed the evolution of Sudan's civil society, during the mass protests of 2018 and during the transitional period and then after the coup and recently after the current conflict started, and how civil society has been driven by new ideas of what the Sudanese state is. We will discuss their visions and how these visions attracted attention, both from the region and the world. But we will also discuss how these visions are in direct contradiction with some of the visions of Sudan's established elite or political class. And finally, we will talk about conflict and peace. And hopefully, we will aim to give you some closing remarks that are useful. My panel today is pretty amazing. Nafisa Eltahir is a Sudanese journalist and member of Local. You guys already know Local, right? From 2 sessions ago. As a reporter for Reuters since 2018, she focused on the Sudanese revolution, transitional period, the war, and with a focus on bringing forward the experiences of ordinary Sudanese beyond imposed narratives. Next, we have Muzan Alneel, who's an industrial policy researcher and writer. She writes about development governance and people-centered policy design. She is the managing director of Istinad Research Center. Istinad stands for Innovation, Science, and Technology for People-Centered Development. We then have Nesrine Malik, who's a Sudanese author and journalist, known for her wide-ranging commentary on issues of race, identity, politics, and international affairs. A bit of a commercial break. Her book, We Need New Stories, Challenging the Toxic Myths Behind Our Age of Discontent, published in 2019, critiques the narrative foundations of increasing intolerance and authoritarian politics in Britain and the US. So she's a Sudanese talking about politics in Britain and the US. I don't know about you guys, but for academics, this is incredible. We usually talk about us, right? We never talk about other people. So well done, Nesrine. And then finally, we have Khalid Elagab. Khalid teaches international affairs at Qatar University. Previously, he taught at the African Studies Program and Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto. His research interests include the application of post-colonial and critical theory approaches to the study of mediation, international relations, security, peace building, and development. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to start with Nafisa. You've reported on Sudan since 2018. You've covered the Sudanese revolution, the transitional period, the political coup, and the current conflict. And you do focus on, or to some degree, on civil society. Can you tell us more about the evolution of civil society during this period?
Sure. Thank you to the organizers for having us here. Thank you all for staying this long. I wanted to quickly, before I make my remarks, to just acknowledge, as a few other people have here today, what's happening in Al-Fashir right now. Not just the attack yesterday, but the kind of imminent takeover of the city and what that means for the unity of Sudan. I think that all of this is really a tragic result of the lack of the kind of reimagining that we're going to discuss today. So when we were given this prompt, I immediately thought of the resistance committees. And I want to use my time to try to complicate our view of that movement. It's gotten a lot of adoration from the West, you know, like this, all these youth and these women in the streets and taking over the dictator and all this stuff. And also a lot of praise kind of from among Sudanese, al-shabab, al-hib baladu, all this stuff. But when it came time to give this organic attempt at democracy any form of power, they were really given nothing. And so I looked back through my interview notes over the last few years, and I put together just a few thoughts about what the committees were doing beyond kind of the protests that I think anyone who was in Sudan saw firsthand. So the activists that I spoke to traced the creation of the resistance committees all the way back to 2013, where they described how a lack of organization on their part was met with brutal force by the Bashir regime, and it resulted in 200 people being killed in one single day. And so immediately, like the resistance committees really came out of a need for real physical security more than anything else at the beginning. They also described how they sought to mirror the format of the neighborhood committees, Lijan al-Ahya, which is something that's existed in Sudan for a while. It's the most basic form of local governance. But under Bashir, it was kind of completely co-opted by the regime, who kind of sought to ingrain themselves in every single thing, including kind of the most basic building block of urban Sudan. They described the committees as being formed first from a nucleus of those who were most politically active in their neighborhoods, but they also really sought actively to reflect the needs and the complaints of their neighbors, and they derived from this both an agenda, but also their legitimacy. And this kind of catering to a constituency is something that, quite frankly, hadn't happened in a very long time in Sudan, least of all by the political parties or, of course, the Bashir regime. I don't know if it's happened since. But this kind of natural, democratic, non-elite progression takes time. And it meant that it took time for a stated platform to emerge beyond the anti-Bashir message, which united a vast swath of Sudanese. It took time for leaders to emerge, particularly given the intentional horizontal structure of the committees. And so that gap allowed space for others, particularly the politicians in the Forces of Freedom of Change coalition, to take on the role as a policymaker, as representative when it came to foreign powers, and later as partner in power with the military. As a natural result, this fragile alliance kind of collapsed over the summer of 2019, particularly with the shock of the June 3rd massacre. And so the resistance committees found themselves in the opposition at that point, and continued organizing protests, but also took on a huge toll in terms of loss of life, in terms of injury, in terms of lives disrupted by a security crackdown. They also did something which I think kind of went unnoticed in, I think, local and international coverage, which is that to address the gaps that I was speaking about before, they started creating a mithaq, or actually it was 2 mawasiq, so 2 charters, which put forward positions on economics, on foreign relations, on the setup of the state. So they really, in detail, articulated what their plan was, and that's kind of the first step you need as a real political actor, an effective political actor. I think that's a lesson learned from the oppressiveness of the Bashir regime, which produced political parties that were based either on religious ideology, on simple opposition to the regime, on historical or religious linkages. But at the same time, there was kind of, and we can talk about this I think a bit more later, there was a lot of attempts to co-opt the movement. And yeah, that's kind of a whole other, we could go on for much longer about that. But we saw this most clearly in the extreme delay in creating a parliament, which never happened in Sudan during the transitional period. And I think that's a huge tragedy. But just to wrap up, I think the way in which they were co-opted more than anything is with the outbreak of this war. It turned revolutionaries into service providers who are no longer debating policy or protest strategies, but were consumed with providing food and water and fuel and evacuation buses and healthcare and a whole host of other government functions, while also dodging the soldiers on both sides who saw them as the enemy. But as one of these activists turned volunteers I spoke to told me, in their eyes, this has only really increased legitimacy of this group of people, these activists turned volunteers, these resistance committees turned emergency response rooms, and potentially maybe even in the wider public. And so it gives life to that kind of movement even under these circumstances. I'll stop there, thanks.
Thank you. So the war basically forced them to take on new forms, right? So they kind of shifted their
Yeah,
their modus
yeah. I mean, I
operandi
think
to-
it's coming from the idea that these are all people who, like I said in the beginning, were concerned about the conditions in their areas, in their neighborhoods. And so at first that was a political thing, and now it's become about the most basic needs.
Okay, and staying with, the role of civil society and how civil society was formed, Muzan, I want to get your take on some of the characteristics of Sudanese society that shaped the nature or the way civil society mobilized or how they organized themselves.
Well, first, thank you, Muez, and thank you to everybody who contributed to this conference. While there are several historic and cultural characteristics of the Sudanese society that had a role in shaping organizing the civil organizations in Sudan, I want to focus on what we can call the base of that. Let's focus on what shapes the material reality within which the Sudanese people operate and organize and live. And maybe let's look at that from the point of view of the distribution of wealth and access to service. If we start with the distribution of wealth, and I think those figures might be shocking, they should be shocking. Sudan's richest 1% control 26% of the country's wealth. That's quarter of the wealth controlled by the top 1%. Sudan's richest 10% control 59% of the country's wealth. So more than half of the wealth controlled by 1/10 of the population. And on the other side, Sudan's poorest poorest 50%, they control less than 5% of the wealth. So less than single digit, 5%. And that's a crazy level of inequality, right? That's one part of this map of access to wealth and services. And let's look at the other side, the one about services. A number of speakers have highlighted the peculiar nature of a war starting in the capital. I think starting with Nesrine on the first day, and I think that's a very important point to highlight, not just because it's the political and administrative capital, but because Khartoum was and is the center of an extremely centralized economy and an extremely centralized system, and that explains why the war had implications that impacted people far out of the areas of military operations in ways that we didn't see in previous wars in Sudan. So prior to the war, Khartoum was home to half or more than half of the large-scale industrial facilities in Sudan. So there are 17 other states, but this one state was home to more than half of the large-scale industrial facilities in the country, with all the opportunities that brings and with all the infrastructure and services that requires. And you can tell if you look at the map of any service instance, like the electricity grid is it's not a grid, it's a star with its center. Khartoum is in the center, and then you have like weak tips and limbs here and there to other urban centers. And the same is true for any other kind of service, education, banking, I don't know, water, telecom. They're all the same situation. And if we go back to electricity, actually, it's only 30 to 50% of the population that had access to electricity prior to the war. So when we hear something like there is a blackout in the country, you know, right now due to the military operations, which happened a few times in the past 2 years or almost 3 years now since the start of the war, well, this blackout, it only affected like 1/3 to 1/2 of the country. The other 2/3 had no access to this service before its disconnection, and that's something important to keep in mind, to understand the level of centralization that even at Jamr al-Khabisa, even the low quality, the frequent disconnections of the electricity, this was a privilege, and that is something that we need to keep in mind, because that's the reality of Sudan. And this reality makes civil society organizing both very crucial but also very challenging. It's very crucial because the majority of the Sudanese people in this situation of centralization of power and services have no tool and no weapon to fight for their rights other than their numbers. And those numbers which can only be activated via organizing. So that makes it very crucial. But it makes it also very challenging because the centralization of service and wealth means that what is usually in abstraction, a representative civil society organization might be in Sudan just a recreation of elitist structures. You know, a labor union who has access to actual work, you know, and the ability to organize, a students' union who has access to education makes it actually questionable the level of inclusivity or representative nature of those structures. So Nafisa mentioned some of the new forms of organizing that we had in Sudan in the past like 5 years or so, and those forms, they had their successes and they also had their failures in terms of breaking the elitist nature of Sudan, of situation in Sudan. And thank you, Nafisa, for mentioning some of the successes, so I can just focus on the failures. And in that terms, of, if we look at the resistance committees, for example, so the resistance committees, they managed to, because they are neighborhood-based, they managed to provide access to the political discussion for people outside the usual urban centers. So that was great. But at the same time, because their design did not intentionally focus on reversing the privileges that existed, the elitist structures that existed, it still ended giving the loudest voices to those in the urban centers, the committees in the urban centers. The emergency committees went a step further. The emergency committees, just like also Nafisa mentioned how in the resistance committees you said that the members told you that it was the people who are most active in political practices who were the members of the resistance committees. But the members of the emergency rooms, because its design is around services, it gave more space, it gave more of the stage for the people who are most useful to their community, who can serve their community, not the people who are the loudest in their community. So that's a step, but we still have the emergency rooms of the urban centers controlling the narrative because of access as well, and because of all the elitist structures that are there already. And the potentials of the emergency rooms are unfortunately right now rather limited by the mindset of this emergency of that they are a temporary solution, unfortunately, and which is it's limiting their ability to create a new form of state building based on service provision for those most in need, instead of what we have right now as a design of the Sudanese state, which is based on interest preservation for those most privileged. And that's what the emergency rooms need to take this step, or we need to take this step in moving towards a more permanent creation of a new imagination of the state, starting from service provision and not interest preservation. So out of this reality, I just want to highlight maybe a couple of lessons that we have out of the organizing in Sudan in the past decade. The first thing is that for those of us who are interested in transforming inequality in Sudan and injustice in Sudan, civil society organizing must be intentionally aware and intentionally designed to reverse existing privileges. In other words, it must be class conscious for it to actually be able to provide something other than reproducing elitist structure. And the other thing is that there's a great potential in a class-conscious civil society organizing, and this potential is clearly seen by those in power, whether it was al-Bashir's regime limiting spaces for organizing, whether it was, as also Nafisa mentioned, the transitional government trying to co-opt resistance committees, or whether it is right now military governments trying to have more of a security grip over the emergency rooms. They are very aware of the potential of class-conscious civil society organizing and its ability to provide a different project, a different political project for the people to align behind, instead of just shifting between like different factions of the elite who have been rotating power between them since it was passed to them by the colonizer. This is a very dangerous political project for the elite, and it's a very hopeful political project for the people of Sudan in general. And right now, during the war, I think it has the ability of bringing an end to the war. Because we saw how in 2019, organizing, the first time that the resistance committees organized a march independently from the establishment, independently from the FFC, independently of the mainstream political parties. And that was in rejection of the massacre. That was when the establishment, they ran back into negotiations because they feared losing power over the country. And that's why it makes sense. I don't think it's very far-fetched to imagine that independent organizing against violence and based on a rights-based political project, a rights-based revolutionary project, can scare them back, because it will create a situation where even war cannot give them power over the people of Sudan. I took a bit too long. I'm sorry about that, but I just think that what makes civil society, class-conscious civil society organizing both an ethical and a realistic solution for Sudan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So this is also similar to, I think, something that Majdi Jazuli wrote in the past, where he compared the formation of the resistance committees in Riyadh, which is quite an upscale neighborhood, to the formation of the resistance committees in Al-Kalakla, which is not an upscale neighborhood.
Yes.
Right? Yes. And he said actually the root of the resistance committee formation in Kalakla was kind of neighborhood organizing to stop police looting the shops of the informal Sittat Aragi, right? Who are the women who sell kind of illegal alcohol. So that was the root of what became the resistance committees in Kalakla. And compare that to the resistance committees that formed in Riyadh, who probably, had their meetings in Ozone, probably, right?
I think it was in this.
I mean, no,
I think it's in the same paper that he mentioned how the resistance committees in Riyadh were collaborating with the police for something.
Yes, yeah, okay.
And how this was such a shock for the members of the resistance committees of Al-Kalakla. And that's why it's important to bring in socioeconomic analysis instead of, as Nafisa said, this whole romanticized, it's like, Shabab al-Sudan behibbu Sudan. It is the economy. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah.
So staying on Riyadh, Nesrine, you mentioned briefly in the opening panel on Thursday that Sudan has an attribution problem, right? That certain groups in society are refusing to admit to their contribution in Sudan's persistent instability. Could you please expand on that?
Happy to. Thank you again for having me. I'm so happy to see so many faces in the room. And yeah, I hope this is an edifying last panel for you all. I'm so happy to hear all of these points about focusing on the economic aspect of it, the class aspect of it, and the centralization aspect of it. The metaphor of Khartoum as a star that just sends out shards of light into the rest of the country is a really compelling one. And also one that I didn't quite understand until I first traveled in sub-Saharan Africa in the sort of early noughties and realized that there were towns and villages outside the capital city that had internet and running water and schools and, you know, prosperity. So it's a uniquely Sudanese, I mean, centralization is a problem everywhere, but it is uniquely sharp in Sudan. And I think in a way, the centralization of Sudan, just coming back to your question, Victor, is that there is a famous phrase in political science about how we don't recognize the climate that we exist in, and therefore we can't name the problem. And it's the concept of two fish swimming in the water, and one fish says to the other, gosh, the water is really dirty today or something, and the other fish says, what is water? Because it's just such a, it's the entire climate in which we live. And I think the attribution problem is because we are so steeped, or those of us in the center, and therefore, going back to Muzan's point, those that have access to the education, have access to discourse-making tools, etc., don't understand the water that they're swimming in. And therefore, the attribution of what the problem is becomes kind of circular and a bit abstract, right? And one thing that we circle around quite a lot in these discourses that are civil society adjacent, and this has been exacerbated by how quickly the revolution was reversed, is the damage of the Bashir years. Right, I think this is one of the biggest sort of elephants in the room, not because anybody deliberately wants to ignore it, because we ran out of time. The damage of the 30 years of Al-Inqaz, both in terms of entrenching centralization, but also entrenching a sort of discursive and intellectual mode of thinking that created a star-like quality, right? In that the shards of what the issues are, what the discourse should be, got more faded and faded as you left Khartoum and as you moved away from the centers of power. And so I find that we refer to the sort of the origin or the source of Sudan's problems in terms of wide, technically accurate categorizations about ethnic conflict and marginalization and tribal fracture and all those things. But what we don't talk about as we circle it is to attribute agency, co-option, and complicity, right? It's a very passive attribution. And actually these things happen in an active way, right? You create systems of patronage around power, large systems of patronage. You create co-options, you create appropriations. The student unions, I was at the University of Khartoum when it was shut down for almost 2 years because of a student union revolt over elections. The student unions' elections are usurped, you shut down the universities, and by the time the universities open up, you have co-opted some members of those student unions. Co-option is not this is to the point about the Riyadh resistance committees cooperating with the police, is that these sorts of recruitments of people in wider society don't happen in a kind of mechanical way. People have to opt into them. And we are very reticent to attribute the problems of Sudan to consistent choices people have made in the center. The other issue with attribution is that, and this is getting a little bit more abstract and away from civil society, but also part of how we need to think about expressing these things via civil society, and it has come up a little bit over the past couple of days, is that there is a sort of determinist approach to the war in Sudan, which is the militarized factions fell out and dragged the country with them. There is a lot underlying that dynamic, right? There is economic exploitation led by industrialists There is a class of basically plutocrats that have taken over and privatized large sections of the Sudanese economy. And there is also a political class that essentially maintained their survival and the centralization of power by constantly trying to kick the can further down the road, right? To sort of keep the genie in the bottle by as many ways as possible. And so I won't speak any further because we still have time on this panel to get into it, but I'm just keen to open the door a little bit from description of the problem in geopolitical ways to a culpability, shall we say, of the problem, and how these dynamics of centralization, appropriation, co-option do not happen mechanically and passively. It means there are people that have an interest in maintaining these systems. And the people that have those interests are not just those in the palace or those in power. This goes back to your point about idealizing the resistance committees. I feel there is also a sort of shame or reticence or idealization of the Sudanese people as people who are suffering and people who have been suffering under governments for successive years that landed from Mars. And I'm like, they're from us, you know, and we are from them. And we need to be talking more in those terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Nesrine. I mean, one thing that Sudanese elites have kind of shaped and assumed throughout Sudan's history has been, you know, the kind of peace-building processes and negotiations when it comes to trying to put an end to certain conflicts. Khalid, your research focuses on conflict resolution and mediation. I think generally, like one of the least understood areas by the general public is certain aspects of peace processes, right? I mean, I, for one, know very little about what happens during a peace negotiation. So could you tell us more about what peace entails, especially in the Sudanese context?
Absolutely. First, I would like to thank everyone for being here, and thanks to George for inviting us. And thank you for having me on. As we all know that social sciences, terms in social sciences are loaded. They hide more than what they reveal, and peace is no exception. Peace is one of the terms that are loaded with a lot of different meanings, and people tend to think that there's only one definition for peace, when there is actually, in fact, many definitions of peace. And unfortunately, it enjoys an ontological stability that we need to deconstruct and reconceptualize in order to make it fit and emanate from a local perspective. And to be more specific, we need more subaltern contribution to the definition of peace. And having said this, let me elaborate more on what is the current understanding of peace in the international arena. The current peace is identified as liberal peace. In a nutshell, that is a peace that would redistribute power to the elite structures that you mentioned. This liberal peace would divide the economic and political pie amongst the elites, and it's a top-down approach to understanding resolution. And it often leads to the recurrence of civil wars sometime after the peace agreement is signed. So it's not really comprehensive enough, even when they call it comprehensive. And the idea behind it is normally divided into two parts, two folds. One is called negative peace, that is the absence of war, absence of killing, but people are happy that there are no more bullets flying in the air. So they're content with that, unaware of the fact that soon people will pick up arms again for the same reasons they picked them up the first time, because the root causes still exist. The second way of looking at peace and how it's defined is positive peace. That is supposed to make us feel good that they're actually going to address peace by having power sharing and wealth sharing pacts. But in fact, what it does, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it distributes that amongst the elites. But nevertheless, the idea behind it is to deal with the root causes. So what's missing from the narratives is the subaltern understanding of peace, because we often forget them. Those who are in destitute, those who've been suffering from war, they know precisely what kind of peace do they want. And to think that in Sudan there is only one definition of peace is problematic also. Because, for example, people of Darfur will tell you the kind of peace that they want will be very different than that of Khartoum, for example. Their needs and their wants are very different, and how they conceptualize peace is very different as well. So therefore, what we need to do to understand peace and to reconceptualize it and to develop new ontologies and epistemologies that would actually track peace from a local perspective, to build it from the bottom up, as opposed to the top-down liberal peace, is to gather more of the local perception and local perspective and the discourse on peace. Now, I was intrigued to hear my co-panelist here talk about the resistance committees, because I have never met any one of them before, and I've been fascinated by them. And they are an example of a grassroots organization that are actually introducing peace from a local level, from a bottom-up approach, and that's the kind of understanding and that's the kind of peace that we want. Having said all of this, we need a broad-based coalition in Sudan that would actually go and get these local meanings and local interpretations and put them together in an agenda to reimagine Sudan, to create peace that is conducive to the needs of all Sudanese people, irrespective of their regions, religions, backgrounds. So I think we need to do that.
Thank you, Khalid. We study, at least I know me and Muzan, and I know Nafisa and Nesrine. I think we're students of civil society in Sudan and have been for the last couple of years. But I've kind of never thought about civil society as a player or a stakeholder in the peace process. Certainly the people within the peace process don't think civil society can play a role, right? They never attend none of the peace negotiations. None of their members are usually present, right? Am I correct? They don't usually.
Or they'll have kind of cute side talks,
events.
events
okay.
for all the civil society people to say what they want to say.
But Khalid, I just want to stay with you for the next question. You mentioned about peace processes, they rely, in order for them to be successful, they rely on broad-based local consensus. Can you give us an example of a peace process that had that?
Absolutely. And that happened actually leading up to the 1972 Addis Ababa Agreement back in the day, when the World Church Organization and the African Church Organization were together working on trying to understand what Southern Sudanese in the diaspora, in the refugee camps in neighboring Zaire, Uganda, and Kenya, how they felt about peace and what do they really want from Sudan and what do they expect from the peace negotiations in Addis Ababa. They visited those local camps and the NDPs camps within Sudan as well, IDPs, sorry, the internally displaced people camps within Sudan as well. They talked to tribal chiefs, ordinary men and women and ordinary people who've been affected firsthand by war and asked them about what is peace, what do you want? And the result was amazing. They've actually told them exactly what they want. And what these two organizations did actually, because of what you mentioned now, that they're not represented in peace negotiations, they've actually bought tickets for some of them to go and attend the negotiations in Addis Ababa. They were not participants in the negotiations, but they were observers, reminding everyone sitting around the table that we are here and our voices should be heard. And that really contributed significantly to the quality of the Addis Ababa Agreement, because it had a lot of consensus behind it. It had the backing of the people in southern Sudan. Ironically, the peace agreement failed many years later, and it was the longest one that actually stood the ground, not because of the lack of consensus in the south, it's because that same process was not done in the north. So people in the north actually stood against it because it did not have the popular support that it had in the north that it had in the south. So it's very important to really create such a collective consensus about peace and what we want in Sudan from all concerning parties. And this, if you think about it, could be the first step towards creating a national identity, creating an identity that we all agree upon, because it will create, hopefully will create a government that will be responsive to the needs of everyone. And once we do that, by the way, we will actually have people willing to compromise and willing to sacrifice in order to serve the larger picture, the larger idea, which is Sudan. I want to play the devil's advocate here if you have time and just show how the society now is polarized around peace and how peace is misunderstood in the current formation of what's happening in Sudan. The definition of peace, as I mentioned, is very convoluted and very diverse. So how are we conceptualizing peace in Sudan at the moment? We have two different groups in Sudan. One of them is saying, bal bas, yes for war. The other group is saying, la lil harb, no for war, no to war. These two believe that the only way for peace is their way. Peace, they have framed it within their own opinions. But is that really the only ways of conceptualizing peace? I wonder. I'll play the devil's advocate by telling you that both are wrong and both are right at the same time. For example, those who say bal bas, yes for war, they think that peace in Sudan can only be achieved by eliminating and eradicating the Janjaweed militia. And at their heart is the preservation of the Sudanese state. They want to preserve the Sudanese state against the threat, and the threat is the Janjaweed. So they think that eliminating the Janjaweed militia through war would actually create durable peace. On the other hand, and they're right to think of and to worry about the entity of the Sudanese state. On the other hand, we have a group of people who believe that peace should be conceptualized through negotiations and achieved, because they ask those who wanted to go to war, but at what cost? People are suffering. We need to end the war now. So at the heart of their understanding of peace is the suffering of the people, and they are right, absolutely. Both of them are right. Now let me say quickly that both of them could be wrong, and just to show you how it's not easy to negotiate. Those who are fighting for war in Sudan and asking for it to continue don't know that as long as the external powers are supporting and providing material, military support to both parties, the war can continue for a long time, and that would lead to the disintegration of Sudan into smaller countries. And the same state that they want to preserve its integrity would be actually eliminated and destroyed. So they're wrong to think that war is going to solve their problem. Let's go back to those who know war. Those groups think that negotiating would actually solve the problem. What in fact it could do is that reproduces the same structure that was before. Because who will be sitting around the table? Hemeti and Burhan. And they will be dividing the political pie and the wealth amongst them. So let's not try to impose one opinion over the other. Let's sit together, all of us, and try to find a formula that would actually work for all of us. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Khalid. I'm going to get to audience Q&A soon, but I'm going to, abuse my privilege, since we're talking about privilege, as moderator, to ask a couple of follow-up questions. But if you can limit your answers to 2 minutes each, would be great. Okay, so let's say, in a hypothetical scenario, Khalid is given control of the peace process, and we get lasting peace in Sudan, or to some degree, some semblance of peace in Sudan. How realistic are the ambitions and visions of civil society, right, post-conflict, given the context within which Sudan exists? So we no longer have conflict. We have some level of peace. How realistic are their ambitions? Yes, please.
That's a hard question. I mean, I'm going to assume that this peace still is kind of under military rule. Yeah.
It's Khalid's piece.
I mean, look, I think one of the slogans during the period kind of after the sit-in, after June 3rd, was "Ma taddiga fak lil-askar," right? So "Ma taddiga fak lil-askar," so don't show the military your back, don't trust them. And I think, to be honest, in any situation where Sudan has a military government, we haven't seen any willingness to cede any power, to be very honest. And that applies, I think, to the RSF side as well. And so I think under the kind of military rule that we see now, without kind of radical pressure on either side, I think it's going to take a lot of time for civil society to build up the kind of momentum, the kind of power. And yeah, I can keep it short to that. I mean, yeah, I'm not optimistic in the current situation.
Okay. Muzan, I want to ask you, something a bit kind of more relevant to the broader political context in Sudan. I mean, Sudan's political history has been super volatile, right? We have short periods of democracy followed by long periods of dictatorships. And recently there's a popular framework developed by Alex Duval called the political marketplace. And he uses this framework to explain Sudan's kind of political reality. What's your take on that?
Explain Sudan's reality. Is that what it does? I think the political marketplace is, it can be a proper tool to explain or break down the behavior of a rentier bourgeoisie in how it utilizes, how they utilize the state as a vehicle for enrichment, for power, and their alliances, their intra-elite battles. I think the problem starts when we think of this tool of observation of elitist bickering as seen in Sudan, because that is not the political scene of Sudan. That's the political scene of the elite. It can be a useful tool, I think, maybe in helping those who create what Dr. Khalid called the liberal peace negotiations, understanding how those elitists, what they want from each other, who will ally with whom, but does it explain the politics of Sudan? I don't think so. Does it provide the people of Sudan with answers for stuff like what Nesrine mentioned about we have the Sudanese people suffering, and it seems like there are Sudanese people who come from Marsh, maybe not Sudanese, who are with different set of interests that are aligned with exacerbating this suffering. It doesn't really help us. It does not. I don't see how the political marketplace can be utilized by the Sudanese civil society to create a space for themselves to push for their kind of peace and their definition of the state. So I'd rather look into tools and theories that provide that, tools and theories that of organizing, tools and theories of understanding why the public or Sudan's lower classes might take on the values of the elite being بلبس the way the elite frame it, or لا للحرب, the way the elite frame it, instead of creating their own narrative. How does that hegemony take place? Those are tools that can advance a revolutionary political project that lead us into the transformation that Nafisa just mentioned, which is what we need. While there are other tools that are for negotiation rooms, and I hope negotiation rooms find something good in them. Good luck.
Thank you, Muza. And Nesrine, you mentioned earlier that it's almost as if Sudanese people think bad governments come from Mars. right? And I'm probably going to get a lot of negative feedback for this, but didn't Tayyip Saleh famously say, where did these people come from?
من أين أتوا هؤلاء?
من أين أتوا هؤلاء, right?
Yeah.
And it was basically, it's quite a kind of an urban stance towards the rural, right? Because this was the first time that, the people in power were not part of the urban, right, upper class.
Yeah.
So can you tell us more kind of about what you mentioned earlier about patronage and complicity?
Yeah, gladly. So this, and it's actually depressing how little, not only how little we have moved on from the time when Tayyip Saleh said that, but how we have actually retrenched. I feel like since the war, the sense of these sort of hordes closing in has intensified, right? Because the RSF is seen as this like alien force. And so the way the way we, and by we I'm talking about like the center of the star, the way the sort of Sudanese identity and conceptualization of Sudanese politics has been created is to both ignore, erase, efface the other, but then choose to demonize it when you wish, right? So it's a situation where you cannot win. And the patronage and the co-option and the centralization of the thinking has created something which is extremely dangerous, and I think we have no hope if this is not addressed, acknowledged at least, before it can be reversed, is this sense that Sudanese pain has a hierarchy, right? Sudanese deprivation and distress has tiers. And one thing that I think is crucial, and here I'm going to diverge a little bit from the language of tools, observation tools, and power structures, because I'm a writer and I'm a bit cheesier and a bit more romantic about these things, is that until you are able to see an RSF soldier who's 16, 17 years old committing the worst crimes, and until you're able to see that person as a child who is of your country and who had very few choices, or at least dramatically fewer choices than you ever had, before you see them as somebody who's coming to take your home, violate your women, destroy your country, then we have no hope, right? I think I'm quite obsessed with this notion now, because in several conversations, discussions, discourses, and broadly online public opinion and the way people have become entrenched in these views, is that whether you are for war or against war, both these positions are dehumanizing each other, right? So the pro-war camp wants a return to the past where the genie can be put back in the bottle and the hordes can go back to their caves. And the anti-war camp wants a situation in which the monsters that have ravaged Sudan for 40, 50 years are eradicated forever. Neither of those people are seeing the Sudanese person on the other side. And so the dilution and acceptance and mainstreaming across the board of who deserves a tear to be shed over them, who deserves to be humanized, I think lies at the heart of why we keep repeating mistakes, and also why we are stuck in these negative peace patterns, right? In that we cease war, we go back to pretending the other does not exist, right? Or that we don't need to worry about them. And because humans, at the end of the day, they need to eat, they need to have a sense of hope, they need to have a sense of a future, and when their backs are pushed up against the wall, they take one of the few options that they have. And these are, in several scenarios, people can revolt in Khartoum, and that is a benign outcome, right, of dictatorship that people celebrate, or people can pick up arms. in Darfur, which is considered a negative way of expressing your politics. But all of these, I would venture, all of these modes of rebellion against the politics that we have are because of poor choices, lack of options, and a lack of seeding a notion of Sudanese as having, and I've written this word and underlined it, a stake, a shared stake together in this country. And so if civil society or notions of identity building, narrative building, storytelling, who we lionize, who we mourn, who we worry about, if we don't start understanding that no one is having a good time right now, no one, even if Fashir falls, la samah Allah, in the next couple of days, the victorious RSF are not having a great time. They're going into a city that has been partly destroyed, starved, and its infrastructure completely erased, for them to pick up the pieces for themselves that they can survive on for the next few weeks until their sponsors tell them what to do. None of these outcomes of victory, whether it's the SAF in Khartoum or RSF in Al-Fashir, involves any of these parties walking into a palace of pearls and marbles, right? The individuals on the ground doing this, forget the leaders, the individuals are in a crucible at the moment. And so even the way we speak as members of civil society, journalists, academics, labor unions, etc., even the way we speak about these scenarios of war reinforce and reify the notion of a bloodthirsty victor, which erases the troops, right? Which erases the subaltern, the person, as you said earlier, the person on the ground who is doing 99% of the dirty act of war. I'll stop there because you said 2 minutes. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to turn to the audience's questions. Khalid, I have kind of 2 questions for you, so if you can answer them together in 2 minutes, if possible. The first is, how do you suggest we gather local perspectives on peace in order to make a real change in Sudan as a whole? And then, how do we then balance the urgent need for peace with the long-term need for rebuilding trust and institutions?
These are very good questions, and they're more practical, and I think we need to ask them. But we do have on the ground people who could serve that purpose, such as the Resistance Committee, for example, everywhere. They could be the ones who are representing, and along with other organizations that can come in and literally interview people, Zamzam camp and other camps in and outside of Sudan. So there are ways of asking people. It doesn't have to be one person or another, or one group or another, but many groups are willing to do it. If the World Church organizations and the African Church organizations send delegations to all these areas and got it done, we can do it too. Well, I mean, any kind of organization that is concerned with, and preferably, as I mentioned, the local groups that are already on the ground. And the second part of the question is?
How do we balance the urgent need for peace with the long-term need for rebuilding trust in institutions?
That's another good question that that is often asked. So the tendency in the peace and conflict is to rush agreements in order to save lives. But there are ways of saving lives, for example, permanent ceasefires or humanitarian ceasefires, where you would stop the war and continue negotiations on good terms. So you don't have people dying, but you take your time, making sure that you actually consult everyone and you get the opinion of everyone harnessed and put forth.
Thank you, Khalid.
You're welcome.
Nafisa? No pressure. What concrete steps can be taken to bridge the gap between civil society's aspirations for a Sudanese state and the practical realities of a political establishment often focused on power sharing among military and civilian actors? So basically a continuation of the question that I asked you earlier.
Yeah, which is good, because I feel like I didn't answer that as
Okay,
well as I
great.
could have. So I think this is a huge problem, right? I think this was, like the essence of the problem between the summer of 2019, the coup in 2021, and then the war. I think that had that relationship been better managed, we might have been in, the civilian government might have been in a stronger place when it came to dealing with the coup and then dealing with the war. In terms of bridging those divides, in the conversations that I had, especially with politicians, quite frankly, there was a lot of condescension. There was a lot of assumption that the resistance committee members, the protesters, were not kind of fully realistic. And I think maybe in some cases they weren't fully realistic, but I don't know that that's necessarily the role in any movement. There need to be people who are realistic, and there need to be people who were kind of pushing the limits of what reality is, and ideally they would work together, right? And I think in this case, the problem is that once it became an issue of power sharing and who joins the military, who works with the military and who doesn't, there was, I think, maybe due to issues on both sides, there was a complete cleaving, and it became a situation where the two sides are almost protesting each other, criticizing each other. So I think maybe a dose of humility, a dose of understanding, a dose of real dialogue, and dialogue where it's not a fear of, if I'm talking to this person, I'm talking to this person. If this party is coming to meet with these protesters, that doesn't mean that they're trying to win them over. It means that we're actually trying to build a movement. And I just want to say, all of this takes time. It was a very short period between the protests in December 2018 and the fall of Bashir in 2019, and when Hamdok was installed in September 2019. It wasn't even a year. And you're talking about people who had lived 30 years of oppression, political parties that had suffered under 30 years of oppression, who had 30 years of honestly probably their own kind of, I'm trying to think of a way to say this, but just history, and their own struggles that maybe they felt like this was their time, and then you have these people who are coming in who are like, no, this is our time actually. So I think time and maybe a hefty dose of understanding and patience and goodwill. So it's still possible, I guess.
You think it's possible? Okay, that's good.
If they take the time to do it. I don't know if people are like all around the world now, so I don't even know if it's possible.
If we have time.
Yeah, I don't know if we have time.
Okay, thanks. Nesrine, I have a question for you, and then for Muzan. Nesrine, you often written about power privilege and the limits of Western political imagination. Nice. How does Sudan's story challenge global assumptions about democracy, revolution, or statehood?
I love the way people describe my work. It sounds cooler than how I describe it. Excellent question, whoever asked it. Thank you very much. Sudan does mess with Western narratives, and it's so interesting to me. I can give you a little kind of inside track on some of the approaches to Sudan and how it fits into. When it fits into certain narratives, everyone's interested, and when it doesn't, people move on. So during the revolution, I was really surprised by how all over the Sudanese revolution, the Western media was. They loved it. They loved the woman in the white thobe standing and chanting at the protesters. They loved the angle about Sudanese women leading the revolution. The whole mass protest bringing down a brutal dictator. It was wonderful, actually, and unusual. The moment it became a little bit messy, the moment it became a little bit not even massively complicated, just a little bit complicated, right? We weren't talking about 4 or 5 other parties coming into the revolution. We were talking basically about the same government, not fully falling, essentially. The moment you had to do a beat of explanation before you got into the story, it was like, oh man, this is too complicated. And everyone moved on very quickly. And so that dynamic is now even worse because the war has become complicated by external actors as well, proxy actors, and there is a galling simplicity to how the Western media needs to package items for its audiences. And there is also a galling simplicity in how consumers want those items to be packaged so they feel like they have some agency, right? So one of the things I'm asked a lot is, what can people do about Sudan in the West? And I'm like, nothing. It's okay. It's not up to you. It's not up to the students on the campus. It's fine. Like, the Gaza thing is a separate thing, you know? These are weapons manufacturers that your university is invested in, you know? Your taxpayer money is going towards weapons, but you do not have the lever. You cannot pull the levers in Sudan. And so there is a sort of liberal, progressive approach to wars when there isn't a straightforward revolutionary narrative of, you know, what can the kind of retail reader or consumer of media do to end the war in Sudan. And that is connected to the way Western governments are talked to or talked about when it comes to these kinds of wars. And so there's a weird and troubling recentering or off-centering of the war in Sudan, because it's now become about the West and what they're not doing and what they can do and the attention they're not paying. And actually the agency and the vitality and the story is all here, you know? It's Fil Khalij, it's in the Middle East, it's in Dubai, in the UAE, and Sharjah. And this is where I encourage people to, where the media can be useful, because it is useful and can create public pressure and embarrassment for stakeholders, is to cover this stuff at home. You know, talk about it in these ways at home, within our media organizations, our newspapers, our TV channels, with all the complications about, you know, state broadcasters, etc. The Western media can only think in a slightly self-involved and charitable way that does nothing but create narratives of futility and hopelessness. So I'm always keen to bring it back when it comes to the media and these kinds of things, bring it back to the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Nesrine. Okay, Muzan, you spoke to the need for emergency rooms to move to class-conscious state building through their service provision. What sort of coordination, regionally or socially, would be necessary for that? In a minute. Not two. In a minute, not two.
I think emergency rooms does come from they do have a class-conscious base due to the fact that they are service-oriented. So since you are service-oriented, you have to prioritize those who are most in need of service. So although it did not come from theory, it does came from from practice. But what it's lacking, and that's what I wanted to highlight, is a vision, an imagination of how that can be a step towards building a new form of a state that prioritizes service provision. The emergency rooms, as you can tell from the name, they think of themselves as an emergency situation kind of solution. It's just it's a temporary response that will just provide something until the good state is back. The good state does not exist. The state of the elite is not good. It cannot be reformed. It cannot be fixed. It cannot provide to the people. And that is where we need. Thank you. That's the step that needs to be taken. That's the work of the revolutionary organizers, the revolutionary intellectuals, because a lot of work has been done over decades to create a situation where we cannot think outside the framework of the existing state, this project of the nation state. So a lot of deliberate, intentional work needs to be done to counter it. It will not just happen because we are good people. Because we are good people, we help each other. But because we are people with the theory, with the class-conscious theory, only then we can get out of this situation in a serious and radical way, I think. Was that a minute?
Yeah, yes, that was great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask all four of you one question before we wrap up. And you do have a minute each to answer it. In your opinions, what is the viability of the Sudanese state as a, as a kind of institutional structure, and what is the viability of the Sudanese nation with respect to the Sudanese identity? Nafisa, you can go first.
Okay, I'm glad you phrased it as two separate things. I think the Sudanese state is only as viable as Hemeti and Burhan and their various sponsors want it to be. And I think that I put that on both of them. Hemeti is obviously creating a parallel government, which immediately threatens that viability, but I think the army has a role to play in terms of if they really want to stop that eventuality. I don't actually think they do, from what we see, just empirically. Not my opinion, I just, from what I'm the news. In terms of the nation state, I think that's different. I think someone in one of the panels earlier, I'm sorry, I don't remember who, was saying that, through this war, we've actually learned about a lot of places in Sudan that we didn't know. People learned things about Sudan that they didn't know. They mentioned dances, I think. But I think everyone is so much more connected to each other now. And I hope, we're also a lot more divided in a lot of ways. But I hope that at least that increased knowledge, increased empathy, the fact that now almost every corner of Sudan has gone through the same thing, helps to at least create that sense of a nation, which is something that can endure beyond the next 10, 20 years.
Okay, thank you. Muzan?
Sure. I think I kind of touched on that when I was answering the previous question, but let me say that the viability of the Sudanese state, to answer the question, we need to say its viability for whom? It's a very viable project for those who have been benefiting from it, and that's why they're fighting for it and putting all kinds of narratives around why the state needs to be preserved. It hasn't been a viable project for those who have been neglected by it, for those who have been used by it since its creation, and those are the majority of the Sudanese people. So it depends on where you center your political project. And if we are to center our political project with the most disadvantaged of the Sudanese people, that this project has failed. The only new thing the war brought is that it gave us seeds of the possibility of new projects. As I said, for example, building a state that is from a political project that is rights-based, the right to access to service, the right to life, and so on. I agree to a far extent with Nafisa regarding the Sudanese nation, that it's something in creation, that it can be created through this shared struggle that Sudanese people are, the Sudanese disadvantaged people are going through. I don't want to say the Sudanese people, because there is that will not be true. Seeking that kind of inclusivity will just mean that we will advance the interest of the Sudanese upper middle class as usual, and name it the interest of the Sudanese people. This building a Sudanese nation is going to be a project that will hopefully be against the interest of the Sudanese upper and upper middle class for the first time, and that is something that we must pay. We need to pay our debt. It's about time.
Thank you. So now you have 30 seconds.
30 seconds, oh my God. So I will just say I agree with both of you on on both points, and I will add in those 30 seconds, I think it is important at this moment to talk not just about what we must build in terms of viability and statehood, but what we must say goodbye to. There is a lot of gripping onto things that have slipped through our fingers a long time ago. And this concept of return, of hanarja, of it's going to be the same and we will go back to the Nile, and I understand why that is a powerful and consoling vision, but one of the few things of war that are actually good in these kinds of scenarios is they burn what is rotten, right? They burn what has not worked. And we need to make our peace with that, right? I think we need to hold things in our mind and in our hearts and say goodbye to them in real life. And until we make peace with loss as a healthy part of the future, we will continue to repeat patterns. So I encourage people to think of loss as a good thing in this instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Nesrine. Khalid.
We will have a state, a viable state, when we uphold the ethos and the spirit of the words of those who were chanting it when they were cowardly when shot. Hurriya, salam wa adala. For those who were chanting and saying, Al-askar lil thakanat wal janjawid yanhal. That's when we will have a good state that is built from the bottom up. But I must warn some people something very important here. It is not about the state only. Change does not start with the state only. It starts with every one of us. The very Sudan that you want to reimagine, you have to embody it. You have to live that Sudan first, because racism is taught, prejudice is taught, classism is taught, regionalism is taught. We need to teach ourselves and the kids that we have to be different in order for Sudan to be different. So we have a role.
Thank you, Khalid. I'm supposed to wrap up, and I will. But as moderator, I think I was supposed to kind of give closing remarks for this session, and then being the last session, kind of a closing remarks for not necessarily for the conference, but to kind of summarize how Reimagining Sudan can help us rebuild, establish peace, build foundations for prosperity and freedom and liberty. The truth is, I tried since last night to write closing remarks, and I failed. Nesrine had nice suggestions this morning, and I honestly don't know what to say. But I will admit that my own position on Sudan's future is blurry. I don't have very strong positions on what the solutions might be. I don't have any ideas what a solution is. I know what is not a solution, right? And I think academics are good at that, right? Like, we like to criticize. This guy's idea sucks, this guy has a nice idea, but we don't have good ideas. Sometimes we might not have good ideas ourselves. And I think for me personally, with respect to Sudan's future, I am out of ideas. But I think I am willing to reimagine it, right? I am willing to listen to new ideas and understand how other people see Sudan. Even if you're privileged. I know we've kind of really kicked you guys while you were down today. But I feel like, as part of Sudan's political project, the idea is that everybody should be involved. So I hope, this conference has given you the opportunity and given you enough information and exposed you enough to the varied kind of aspects of Sudanese life for you to reimagine a new Sudan for yourself. Sure. Okay. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you to our panelists, and as we bring this conference to a close, it is fitting that we turn to the person whose support made it possible. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Safwan Masri, Dean of Georgetown University in Qatar, and the Distinguished Professor of the Practice at Georgetown School of Foreign Service.
Thank you. What a fitting panel to end an exquisite 2.5 days with. And I want to begin by what Khalid and Nesrine ended with. Nesrine said that nothing will change until the Sudanese on either side, simplify it or reduce it to two sides, even though nothing is that simple, until the Sudanese sees the Sudanese on the other side. Is that what you said, Nesrine? Nesrine, somebody's taking your attention away from me, and I don't like that. Okay. Nothing will change until the Sudanese sees the Sudanese on the other side. And Khalid, by saying you can't, and you said something else also, which is we don't need the West, right? We don't need the external actors. External actors have done enough damage, right? It has to start from within, and we cannot rely on the state because we, and here I am including myself, the Sudanese, we are the state, right? And change starts from within. And I thought that that is such an incredibly powerful note to conclude with. So I'm here really just to thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating in this. This conference has just been incredibly inspiring. You know, having the academics, the artists, the activists converging in one current that compelled the world to see Sudan. I see Sudan today in a way that I did not. In a way that is far more nuanced and far more sophisticated than I did 3 days ago. I understand Sudan and the Sudanese people and the Sudanese heritage and culture way beyond any books that I could have ever read. We heard Sudanese art described as a sublime kind of beauty that touches the soul, and that came alive over the past 2.5 days. We also heard that political processes have been dismissed as devoid of imagination. That contrast between the beauty that touches the soul and political processes that are devoid of imagination, that contrast defined our conversations. Violence and bureaucracy shrinking what is possible, while art and culture opening it wide again. We felt it when El Sara and Huda Asfour took the stage on Thursday night. The music, the music literally lifted the room. And our panelists, Bentley and Wahbi, rose, and others followed, and all of a sudden we were all singing, even if we didn't know the words. That was Sudan's cultural vitality. Irreducible, contagious, and alive. If one thread runs through this conference, it is this: there is no single Sudanese story before us. There are countless stories, from Khartoum to Darfur, from village to diaspora, from those displaced to those who remain, from those murdered or starved to those who have survived. To see Sudan is to see them all. Some may question why we, and some have, why we choose to examine Sudan through the prism of art. The answer is plain and simple. Because Sudan exists, and the Sudanese exist. And in seeing Sudan through art, through culture, we see humanity itself, and with it, the solidarity that binds us. Woven into artistic expression is the political. Everything is political. Art no less so. Sudan's artists have rendered their country through cartoons and paintings, through food, song, and performance. In doing so, they make the political personal and the personal political. For those outside the Sudanese community, like myself, Sudan shifts from something remote mediated by news headlines, to something tangible, multidimensional, human. For the Sudanese themselves, this gathering became a celebration of Sudan, of resilience, of life amidst trauma. I am deeply proud of our Sudanese students and their courage throughout this conference. They insisted that the suffering of their people remain at the center, and it has. That we resist false equivalences, and that we understand art not as escape, but as testimony, memoir, and ultimately defiance. Conversations of this magnitude are never seamless. They are meant to unsettle as much as they illuminate. It would be unrealistic and perhaps even irresponsible to expect consensus. What emerged instead was something rarer, a forum where grief, dissent, pride, and hope could coexist. Sudan's story is too layered and too urgent to be contained in a single frame. And that is the very mission of this university, to cultivate critical thinking and to ensure that diverse perspectives confront one another with honesty. If that is the mission of the university, then Hiwaraat is its practice, a space where the most urgent topics of our world are brought into conversation with all their difficulty and weight. In the end, this gathering, which had the largest share of women panelists in Hiwaraat's history, I must add, this gathering became something more, an arc of preserving what Sudan cannot afford to lose, its living memory. And as seeing Sudan widened our imagination of what a nation holds, our next Hiwaraat will widen our imagination for how the world is powered. On October 4 at GUQ, Decolonizing Energy will ask how energy, so central to the modern world, can be rethought through histories, cultures, and perspectives rooted in the Global South. And in that same spirit, this coming Tuesday, September 23rd, at GUQ, our Qalam literary series returns with acclaimed British-Palestinian author Isabella Hamad, whose novels reveal Palestine in its lived reality and remind us again that to see through art is to see humanity itself. To see through art is to see humanity itself. Now, this vital conference, you've given me way too much credit, Muez. It was only possible because of the collective effort behind it. I stand before you because of the incredible people I work with at Georgetown. My gratitude goes first and foremost to Zahra Babar and Susie Mergani. Zahra and Susie, please come center stage. Come here, come here. Okay. The extended team of the Center for International Regional Studies has also done incredible. Susie, come here, please. Come on. Zahra, come. I feel I'm cheating if I'm standing here and thanking everyone and you're not by my side. Here. To Professor, not behind you. Professor Ruqayya Abu Sharaf. Dr. Muez Ali. many, many others. But the students of GUQ, in particular, Aya Ahmed and Noon al-Sharif, please stand up. Did they stand? But also the African Students Association and Students for Justice in Palestine, especially for the support they have lent our Sudanese students and for challenging us as they have. Naila, you too. Thank you. You have no idea how many people make this work and seem seamless. 100 of you, volunteers, countless ways that you have made this experience meaningful for everyone. From our comms team, to our events team, to various people throughout the organization. I will not start naming them because when I do, I will miss so many. Thank you. Thank you to all, thank you, yes. Yeah, I know. Everyone, Zahra. Okay. I also want to thank the students who've come here, who've been part of this. We do this with you, we do this for you. And the faculty who have come and been part of this. And of course, the staff. So, I don't want to take too long. Big thank you. What I want to end with is, let us pray and hope that the unbearable suffering in Sudan, in Yemen, in Palestine, and everyone else ends, and ends soon. Inshallah. On a personal note, thank you. Thank you for educating me, and I'm sure I speak for many, many people over the past 3 days, for making me appreciate Sudan, the nation, the history, the culture, the people, everything about Sudan. Sorry? Everything. The culture is part of the food, right? Or the food is part of the culture. I feel incredibly privileged and blessed, and I feel like I've traveled Sudan over the past 3 days, and the recurring thought I've had in my mind, I cannot wait for peace to come so that I can go and experience Sudan for myself in a way that you have lit the way for me to do over the past couple of days. Thank you. Have a safe journey and see you soon.